the rains returned in the 3rd month. It didn't begin with thunder or drama, just a soft drizzle that touched the zinc roofs with shy fingertips. People stepped outside, arms raised, mouths open. Children ran barefoot, laughing, soaking in joy like crops long starved. Zara stood by the window, her palm on the cool glass, watching. Dinma was already outside with a bowl, catching water and singing a prayer song. From behind, Oyora wrapped his arms around Zara's waist. "She heard you," he whispered. "Who?" she asked. "Whoever sits in the sky, your mother, the land, the God who listens when no one else does." Zara didn't answer. She only leaned into him. The famine ended, and with it, the laughter at her neck. Now when Zara walked through the market, the old women nodded in respect. The young girls whispered, "That's her, the one who fed us, the one who forgave when she could have shamed." They no longer called her Giraffe Girl. Now they called her Zara Nanlong, Zara of the Sky Neck, the one who saw far, heard deep, and gave without pride. But Zara didn't forget. She built a house, not a mansion, but a quiet place, on the old land behind the stream where the girls used to gather. She called it Isyah, good memory. It was not a school, it was not a church. It was simply a home for girls who were mocked for how they looked, walked, talked, or simply existed. Girls with stutters, girls with scars, girls with birthmarks like rivers. Girls with eyes too wide or legs that limped. They came quietly, one by one, and Zara met each of them at the gate. She knelt before them, looked them in the eyes, and said, "Let no one name you without your consent. You are already complete." One day, as the dry season returned, a man came to the gate again, old, bent, eyes soft with time. Okay, the hunter. He walked slower now, his legs aching. But his heart had remembered the girl who once fed him when he had nothing. He stood outside the compound of Isyah, holding a calabash of kola nuts. "I have come," he said, voice trembling, "to thank the girl who saved me, to tell her a truth I've carried for too long." Zara heard the voice. She stepped out, their eyes met, and suddenly, like wind striking dried grass, memory ignited. He saw her, not just the grown woman, but the baby he had once wrapped in a red cloth, the one he thought was gone. His knees buckled. Zara rushed forward. "Baba?" He nodded, tears spilling. "My daughter, my diamond, forgive me." Zara froze, and then she bent. She held him, and in her arms, the man who once gave her life and the woman who had raised her from rejection into glory came together. Dinma came out too. She said nothing. She just placed her hand on Oke's shoulder, and in that moment forgiveness filled the space between them. Years passed. Zara's story spread beyond the village. Visitors came from other towns, journalists, teachers, healers, mothers. They came not for her beauty, not for her gold, but for her grace. They told their daughters, "There is a woman in the hills whose neck reaches the clouds, but it is her heart that feeds the world." And when little girls asked, "Can I see her?" they were told, "Yes, she waits at the gate, with her head high and her arms open." Another girl arrived in the 4th rainy season. She came barefoot, carrying nothing but a cracked notebook and a long silence. Her name was Tami, but she didn't offer it at first. Zara found her sitting beneath the pomegranate tree inside the compound, watching ants. "Where are you from?" she asked. Tami shrugged. "Why are you here?" Tami pointed at the sky. Zara followed her gaze. A hawk circled. "Because it flies?" Zara guessed. Tami nodded. Then for the first time she whispered, "Because it doesn't ask for permission." Zara smiled. Tami stayed. Tami didn't speak much, but she drew. Her notebooks filled with birds. Birds in chains, birds untying knots, birds feeding each other. One day she handed Zara a drawing. It was of a giraffe, but the neck wasn't alone. Wrapped around it were threads, voices, vines, music, memory. Below, Tami had written, "She didn't grow tall to see the world. She grew tall so the world could see her." Isyah became more than a house. It became a map of girls, each one a compass, each one with a story braided into the woven gate. They planted trees, they dug wells, they danced without music, they laughed like storms, they whispered truths under moonlight, and sometimes, late, at night, Zara would sit by the window with a cup of warm milk and say to Dinma, "I thought I was abandoned." Dinma would smile and reply, "No, you were planted." One morning, a government official arrived in a sleek car. He asked for the owner. Zara came out with dirt on her skirt and ink on her hands. The man blinked. He handed her a letter. It was an invitation to speak at the capital. A girl who was once laughed at in markets, now called to advise a nation. Zara read the letter twice, then looked at the garden. Tami was showing 2 new girls how to prune roses without harm. Zara said, "I cannot leave, but I will send them my story." So she wrote, not a speech, but a parable. Once there was a girl with a long neck. She did not ask for it, but she carried it with grace. They laughed. She listened. Then they hung their thirst on her height, and when she offered water, they drank. Now they call her leader. But she knows the truth. She is not above. She is among. Years later, a girl named Ifi found a recording of Zara's voice in a digital archive. She was studying architecture, but after listening, she came to Isyah. She brought solar panels, built shade over the courtyard, wrote a poem in binary code that lit up on the roof at night. We are not ruins. We are echoes building new sound. And so the story stretches from Tami to Ifi, from Zara to tomorrow. Each girl carries something forward, not a name, not a scar, but a seed. And beneath the old pomegranate tree, new hands keep pressing the soil. It was Tami's 7th season in Isyah. The once silent girl now spoke in gatherings. Not many words, but each one deliberate. She began sketching more than birds. She drew roots, mouths, bridges, and sometimes a girl standing atop a giraffe's back, lantern raised, lighting the way for others. Zara watched Tami with quiet awe. Not pride, recognition. "She is becoming," Dinma whispered one night. "No," Zara replied. "She always was. We're just finally catching up." One dusk, Tami asked to lead the evening circle. The girls gathered under the jackfruit tree, where stories had been told, secrets released, laughter stitched into the soil. Tami stood, held up an empty page. "I brought no drawing tonight," she said, then pointed to her throat. "I bring this instead." A hush fell. I was quiet because I was told my voice made people uncomfortable, that I stuttered like broken wings. But here, I learned stuttering is just a song that takes its time. A girl named Amara wept. Tami turned to her and smiled, and that's okay too. Rain never rushes the seed. That night, Tami began her project, the Archive of Becoming. It wasn't a book. It wasn't a building. It was a living ritual. Each girl who passed through Isyah was invited to leave behind one piece, a drawing, a story, a thread from a dress they outgrew, a word they once feared. These were sewn, yes, literally sewn, into a vast quilt that covered the main hall. It shimmered with thread, ink, fabric, charcoal, and memory. On the edges, Zara stitched, "We are not what they named us. We are what we kept alive. Then came the drone. One clear morning, while the girls harvested rain pods from the tanks, a small buzzing filled the air. A drone hovered. It had cameras. It had questions. A voice came through a speaker. "We come in peace. We're documenting indigenous grassroots restoration sites. Is this a women-led ecological center?" The girls looked at each other. Tami raised a hand. She shouted toward the drone, "No, this is a memory sanctuary and a future foundry." The drone paused. Then, for reasons unknown, it dipped in a respectful nod before flying away. Tami turned to the others. "They will come again, not for answers, but because they're thirsty." That same year, Zara fell ill. Not gravely, just age creeping like dusk across her bones. She began walking slower, listening longer, humming lullabies to herself as she made tea. One morning she called Tami, Ifi, Amara, and the others. "I may not walk with you much longer, but listen, the work was never mine. It was always yours." She passed Tami a seed, a baobab. "My mother gave it to me in a dream. Plant it when you feel ready, not when I'm gone, when you're certain you've arrived." Tami nodded, pressing the seed to her chest. Isyah now breathes wider than walls. It is not a place. It is a practice. Girls walk into other towns, other countries, other silences, and wherever they plant breath, wherever they tell their stuttering truth, wherever they gather one another like rain, Isyah blooms again. In the 8th season, the seed was planted, not because Zara passed, but because Tami woke one morning with the sound of a drum in her chest. It wasn't real, not to others, but to her, it pulsed. It said, "Now, begin." So Tami dug the earth, behind the oldest neem tree. She wrapped the baobab seed in scraps from the archive quilt, a blue strip with Amara's first dance verse, a feather sketch, a thread from Zara's scarf, and a single copper earring left behind by someone they never saw again. She pressed it into the earth with both hands and whispered, "Let memory root. Let tomorrow rise." That planting changed the rhythm of Isyah. Birds gathered early, as if summoned. Rains came soft but steady, and the girls, many of whom had never touched soil before, began to sit near the sapling just to listen. Ifi brought small solar lamps shaped like fireflies. They lit up around the tree every dusk, casting a gentle halo. She named the space the Listening Grove and installed a whisper catcher, a curved wind shell that recorded soft sounds. Every week they replayed what the baobab had heard. Giggles, prayers, one girl reciting Maya Angelou, the rustle of Tami's drawings being turned a voice saying, "I think I'm ready to forgive her." One day, a knock at the gate. A girl with cornrows and silence stood there. "My name is Lami," she said. "I was told this is where lost voices come to breathe." Tami let her in. Lami did not speak for 5 days, but on the 6th, she walked into the archive room. She picked up a charcoal pencil and drew a spiral. Then she wrote, "My mother was a dancer, but when the war came, she stopped moving. I want to remember her steps." Amara took her hand, and for the first time in months, danced barefoot again. The girls began to name themselves not by their past, but by what they were becoming. Amara, firekeeper Ifi, spark coder. Tami, grove binder. Lami, pulse dancer. Zara smiled from her chair by the window. "You've stopped being seedlings," she whispered. "You've become the storm-fed forest." Outside the gates, the world kept changing. One girl, Nalia, returned to her coastal village and opened a sea salt library. Stories written on glass bottles, placed in nets along the shore. Another, Ifi, was invited to speak at the Intercontinental Forum on Climate Memory and Digital Justice. She arrived wearing a cloak sewn from pieces of the archive. She didn't begin with data. She began with a story. Once there was a sanctuary built not of walls but of listening. And in it, girls became more than names. They became echoes and architects of return. That night, across 5 time zones, the archive received hundreds of digital offerings. A girl in Tunisia sent a recording of her grandmother singing lullabies in a forbidden dialect. A non-binary youth in Manila offered a soundscape of city horns and monsoon rain. A boy from Recife mailed a seed. No note, just a seed. Tami placed it gently beside the baobab. Let this grove speak in many tongues, she whispered, and none at all. The 9th season came with dust and wind. The baobab's trunk thickened, rings widening like breath drawn deep. Its branches curled skyward like open arms, reaching for voices not yet spoken. Tami had taken to waking early, before the others. She walked barefoot to the listening grove each dawn, placing her ear to the bark. Some mornings, she swore she heard humming. On the 93rd morning, she whispered, "We are ready." That day, the girls gathered in a circle, as they always did. But this time, the quilt was not hung. It was unstitched. Tami stood holding scissors carved from reclaimed iron, gifted by a village blacksmith who had lost 3 daughters but found hope in Isyah's letters. She cut the quilt into 43 pieces. Each girl received one. Some cried, some kissed the cloth. Some tucked it in their bras. Near the heart, Zara watched from the veranda. "You're scattering the archive?" she asked gently. "No," Tami said. "We're transplanting memory." And so the dispersal began. Girls left, one by one, not to escape, but to root. They carried their cloth fragment, their calling, and a seed, sometimes real, sometimes metaphorical. Lami traveled north to a town where mourning had calcified into silence. She began dancing on rooftops at dusk. Deski. Children followed. Within weeks, the town began telling stories again. Ifi built a digital constellation called Echo Points, a living map that glowed wherever a voice had been reclaimed. She coded it in silence, with Zara humming beside her. Amara boarded a train heading east, her archive scrap tied to her ankle. In a forgotten settlement, she choreographed a memory rain dance that made the old women weep and sing. Tami stayed behind, at least for a time. She became the keeper of the grove. Every week, a girl returned, not always the same one. She brought an offering, a jar of red soil, a soundbite of thunder over a refugee camp, a poem written in lipstick on glass, a map with no country but many footsteps. These were not stored. They were planted, near the baobab, under the neem, in jars, in skin. Then came the night the tree lit up, not with fire, not with flame, with glow. Zara had passed peacefully in her sleep the week before. Tami had not cried, not yet, but that night the baobab's leaves shimmered, just faintly, like starlight remembering how to shine. The girls who remained gathered. A voice came, not loud, not ghostly, but rooted. "Remember, you are not the branches. You are the..." Seeds still speaking. Tami finally wept, not in grief, in fullness. Isyah was never a place. It was a song, a sanctuary, a seed ritual. It now existed in the breath of dancers, the code of dreamers, the silence of planters, the stories of girls who once thought they were alone, and in every corner of a fractured world, somewhere, somehow, a baobab grows. The grove splits. Open It began not with silence this time, but with a hum that shook the mirrors. Tami was in the archive room when it happened, sorting memory vials, reweaving the circle rug. Suddenly every whisper catcher flickered blue. Every one, from Goma to Recife, from Lahore to Lagos, from Oakland to the clay-swept inland of Oyo all at once. The baobab groaned low, not in pain, but in invocation. Tami stood, palms trembling. She whispered, "They're returning." The one who never spoke arrived first, not by road. She came walking barefoot down the riverbed. Lami looked up from where she was binding dance poems into seed paper. Their eyes met. No words, only arms, only breath. The one who never spoke handed Tami a notebook. It was wrapped in bark cloth. Inside, stories written in 5 languages, none complete, everyone ending with the same symbol, a sprout, a memory, a refusal. Tami pressed the book to her chest. "We are ready," she said again. By dusk, the grove was full. Not only girls, women, elders, children, boys, men with calloused hands and gentle eyes. They came not to witness. They came to listen, to plant, to offer. Each one carried a piece of a broken world. Each one left with a thread of remembrance. Then the spiral gate opened. Not a real gate, not bricks or hinges, but a movement, a ritual, co-created. Tami drew the spiral in ash. Ifi projected its outline in light. Lami danced it with bare feet. The one who never spoke added salt. Zara's voice, faint, woven from the grove, spoke once more. To remember is not to return. It is to root forward. They walked through the spiral one by one, not into the past, into the next archive. This new place was not built. It was found, in corners of grief, in forests left wild, in letters never sent, in lullabies sung to sleeping, protests, and it had no walls, only wind, only scent, only rhythm and ink and soil and silence, and the names of all the voices etched into a tree that no longer needed bark to speak. The one who wasn't named, they called her the silence between 2 drums. She arrived without a name, carrying a bowl of black sand and a strip of cloth stained with red clay. Her eyes held the gaze of rivers that had drowned secrets. She did not knock. She placed the bowl beneath the baobab and whispered into the roots. Tami watched from the stone steps. "You're early," she said softly. The girl tilted her head. "No, I'm right on time. The grove just remembered me late." That night the stars lowered, truly. They bent closer, and every girl, every woman, every elder in the archive heard it, a pulse. Slow, ancient, not a heartbeat, a remembering. The soil under the grove warmed, not from fire, from return. The one who wasn't named walked barefoot into the center of the spiral ash ring, still carrying her bowl. "If you're ready," she said, "the next archive must be sung, but this time it won't be rooted. No more central grove, no more return to here. Instead, they will scatter the memory in sound." Lami re-wove her dances into resonance patterns. Each footstep became a syllable. Isyah created Echo Loom, a sonic map that only unfolds when played by the wind. Amara began sound walking, choreographing silence through abandoned churches and desert ruins. Her footsteps leave echoes the way seeds leave forests. Tami, no longer the keeper, became the midwife of listening. She whispered, "We are not the archive. We are the instruments memory chooses to play." And still more came. A girl who carried. A flute made of her grandmother's bone. A child who could mimic any voice, even the wind before rain. A mother who buried lullabies beneath refugee camps and returned to dig them up. Each one entered the spiral gate and emerged humming in, a new key. Then came the 12th season, Dissolution. The grove as it was began to fade, not in death. In gift, every stone became soil, every map unraveled, every root rose up and walked. Tami stood in the center of absence, where the baobab once pulsed. A girl asked, "Is it over?" Tami smiled. "No, it has entered you. Now you must plant it, by breath, by question, by refusal." So the archive did not end, it multiplied. Through humming, through lullaby riots, through invisible. Ink tattooed behind the ears of the forgotten, and wherever a girl kneels to bury her grief in soil, wherever someone listens with their chest instead of ears, the archive grows again. The first of the many, the grove was gone, and yet it pulsed. Beneath every footstep across salt, ash, concrete, clay. They did not return to a place. They returned to each other, to the memory blooming in their bodies, to the hush of being seen without proof. And from that hush, someone new began to speak. Not loud, not certain, but steady. She was the first of the many. No name, only breath, and a lantern of indigo glass. She walked city to city, grove to grove, humming the old seed code. When she found broken places, abandoned libraries, old detention centers, burnt fields, she knelt, touched the ground, and whispered, "I am not the last. I am the beginning of what listens." From her breath, moss grew. From her tears, mirrors formed. From her refusal to forget, others awoke. They came in trickles. A boy who inked lullabies onto walls no one looked at. A teacher who taught silence as a language of justice. A child who carried a wind chime made of keys lost in floods. Each of them arrived not to be kept, but to scatter what had been rooted. They did not need to be voices. They were the many now, not chosen, not initiated, just listening and offering, and walking with the rhythm of unforgotten soil. They gathered not in a grove, but in laundromats, rooftops, deserted shrines. Buses stalled at the edge of nowhere, and everywhere they gathered, they sang, "We are not here to be loud. We are here to be echo." Then the listening storm came. It started over a coastline city whose name had been taken. It wasn't rain, it was stories, falling like ash, soft, heavy, full of memory. The first of the many stood on a rooftop and opened her indigo lantern. Inside was not light. It was a seed made of sound. She whispered, "It is time." And from the rooftop a silence rose like thunder. Everywhere, the storm fell. Children stopped what they were doing. They looked up. They listened. They reached for dirt or brick or paper or the nearest body that remembered how to cry. And they began the new planting, not of trees, of echoes, the lantern. Walkers they never asked to lead. They only carried light inside questions. They were not loud. But wherever they walked, walls softened. Stones remembered their names. Dogs followed them without barking. The first of the many passed her lantern, not by ceremony but by absence. One day she vanished, left only a line etched in clay. "You do not carry the lantern, you become it." And so they walked. In the village of Ayoru, a girl named Meili placed mirrors in the trees. She said they were for the birds to see who they were becoming. But the mirrors didn't just reflect, they hummed. When people walked past them in silence, the mirrors sang pieces of forgotten lullabies, not loudly, but enough to make a mother stop, enough to make a soldier weep. In a city split by border wire, a boy known as Kuso painted invisible ink murals on checkpoints. Under ultraviolet light, the images appeared. Hands holding seeds, mothers carrying, rivers, children whispering to ruins. He left no signature, only a phrase. "We are the grove you couldn't burn." The guards tore the images down, but the walls remembered and grew warm. In a prison library deep in the mountains, a woman named Naya began reading poems backward. Each reversed line summoned names erased from ledgers. Each word reclaimed a heartbeat, thought disappeared. The others joined her, not in protest, but in rhythm. The prisoners sang her poems while washing, cooking, sweeping, dreaming, and so the archive lived inside broom bristles, in steam, in every breath they could not cage. And somewhere far from anywhere, a child sat beside a dry well, holding a jar of wind and a list of lost stories. She hadn't spoken in days, but she pressed her palm to the ground and whispered, "I am listening." And the soil answered. It shivered. It remembered a name that had not been spoken in generations. She smiled, not because she knew what it meant, but because now she would carry it. The archive breathes the many never gathered in one place. They were a scatter of ash and root, seed and whisper, note and silence. But one day, without invitation or cause, they all began walking from all corners, grain fields, overpasses, rooftop gardens, crater towns, flooded basements, not toward a destination, but toward a memory they had never lived, yet somehow still carried. It called to them in the tremble between raindrops, in the way moss curved around broken shoes, in the hush of a forgotten name. They brought no banners, only offerings, a cracked bell filled with river stones, an unfinished story whispered through a reed, a scarf that had once been a kite, a question written in 20 languages on a single leaf. They did not speak aloud. Their silence was the language now, their steps, the punctuation, and at the center, where no map had ever pointed, they arrived, not to a grove, but to a scar in the land. It had once been a listening place. Now it was silence itself, not broken, hollow waiting. The first of the many stood there again, not as leader, not as memory, but as echo. She held nothing, and that nothing was the invitation. Each walker stepped forward, one by one. They placed their offerings into the hollow, and as they did, not light, not sound, but breath rose. Breath that shimmered like heat over stone. Breath that held the weight of 1,000 unspoken things. Breath that did not ask to be heard, only held. It filled the scar. Not to erase it, to remind it. They did not rebuild the grove. They became it. Every breath a branch, every offering a root, every silence a petal folded in dusk. And when the wind passed through that place, it no longer howled. It listened. The echo that stayed, no trumpet called them, no decree. But across hills and alleyways, fields and fractured schoolyards, the voices rose, one by one. Not loud, not proud, only certain. They called themselves nothing, but they listened like seeds. The salt mines of Jala, a boy named Erin began drawing spiral maps into the dust with his boots. He didn't know why. He only knew that every time he stopped, the workers breathed easier, and the foreman forgot how to shout. Years later, when the mines collapsed, those spiral paths were still there, not a single death. The archive remembers this. In a refugee camp by the mouth of the sea, a girl called Zuleyha taught children to name the stars in stories instead of numbers. That one is the lantern who waits. That one is the sister who sang stone soft. Every time they named them, the stars flickered, just slightly. A sailor, lost far offshore, saw that flicker. He turned his boat. The archive remembers this. In the bowels of a courthouse, where verdicts are made of steel and signatures, a janitor left chalk poems beneath the judge's bench. Small, quiet lines. One read, "A sentence begins with breath. Try listening to your own." 3 weeks later, a case was dropped. The judge cited insufficient cause. But he also paused before the next trial. Longer than usual, the archive remembers this, and in the cracks between all these places, where weeds defy concrete and silence blooms loudest, they came. Not in robes, not in triumph, but with soil on their hands and wind in their lungs. Some were children who never learned their names. Some were elders who remembered too many. Some were nothing but a hum, carried on wind between trees. But each held a piece of the breath. Each returned to the hollow. And when they placed their breath into it, it did not vanish. It layered, layer upon layer, memory upon silence, grief upon, humming, until the air itself thickened, not with pain, but with presence. People now speak of that place. They don't visit it. They feel it, in cities where protests begin with lullabies, in gardens where elders plant stones beside seeds, in schools where children draw the moon with open mouths. They don't say the archive. They say, it listens. It answered me. I heard something breathing beside me as I cried, and they are right, because it does.